In previous interviews with the Lobo, you've been vocal about the impact an increase in required credit hours for the lottery scholarship would be for minority students. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, one thing that I want to definitely clarify is that it's not just for minority students. The impact will actually be across the board. But the data that we have and research that we have from, particularly New Mexico State University, it does show that the most impacted, negatively impacted, would be minority students, Hispanic students, low-income students, with changes in course load. And what was interesting when we look at the data is if you compare, the impact, if you look at GPA versus course load requirements, the one that had a more significant impact was actually the increase in course load. It wasn't the GPA, although it would have an impact. The one that would have most was course load. And I think that's a very important point, is that this would be an impact across all students, regardless of ethnicity. But in particular, though, the most significant impact is for minority students, low-income Hispanic students.
And the UNM president and provost have expressed their approval of Senate Bill 347. The provost has gone to say that the bill will push students to graduate sooner. How do you feel about that?
Well, one thing, though, that I just think about is I haven't seen anywhere written that they were actually publicly supporting Senate Bill 347. Especially after reading President Frank's interview the other day on the Daily Lobo. I don't remember reading that he clearly stated that he supported it, and especially if he made a statement that actually said that he wasn't in favor of course load increase. Like, he said that if he were to decide anything for that he actually would have increased GPA and left course load the way it was, meaning that it would have stayed at 12 credit hours. And so I don't know if they, absolutely endorse it. I mean, I would like to see that or hear that. And so there were a lot of different issues involving Senate Bill 347 with the House amendment that I think a lot of people weren't aware of and still are not aware of. And so I think it's very important that we educate our communities and especially our students and families as to those changes and what the House amendment changed and what was maintained in Senate Bill 347. But one of the most important changes that happened as a result of this bill is that course load would now be increased to 15 credit hours. And so that's a very important thing to focus on. And for me, as an educator of over 15 years, what's vital is that our universities and institutions across the state now really look at and analyze the potential impact this will have on students. So now that the change has gone through, what are we going to do as institutions to be responsible for understanding and analyzing the real impacts that this will have, right?
Speaking of President Frank, your organization has claimed a number of students who were offended by comments by the president concerning students who took less than 15 hours. What can you say about this?
Well, just to clarify again, it's not just our organization. It's actually a coalition, a statewide coalition of students, administrators, leaders, community members. It's not just coming from our coalition, but there are students on campus and outside of campus, community folk and families, that they are just surprised that President Frank would make that type of insinuation that somehow students who were to take less than 15 credit hours were somehow less engaged with their education. And the one word that he used, and I think that's where people were offended by it, is that they were dabbling with their education, or dabblers. And so I personally spoke with many parents and many students, even during the legislative session and even after, that they're actually very worried about having to take 15 credit hours now and how that's going to impact them, in their studies. And it's not that they're not serious about their education or that these families don't care about their education. It's that, they have to work and they have family commitments, religious commitments, cultural commitments, where they have other things to focus on other than just their education. They don't have the privilege to just focus on school itself, right? And so the very important thing to point out is that we need to look beyond UNM too, right? It's not just students at UNM that are going to be impacted by these changes with Senate Bill 347. It's going to be a statewide impact. And if you look at the state, other institutions require 12 credit hours as full time. And so now with 15 credit hours, how many students will you potentially impact? And I actually have numbers that were given to me from the higher education department with figures broken down by GPA, ethnicity, FAFSA, expected family contribution, it's specific to the lottery scholarship. And just looking at that data, there's over 4,000 students at research and comprehensive universities we're taking less than 15 credit hours. And so we're talking about over 4,000 students, and these again are just preliminary numbers that are going to be impacted by this change. And then so how are they going to be impacted? And so when there's that insinuation that students are not engaged with their education, or they're less serious, or they're dabbling around, students are offended and they are hurt by those comments, right? And for us, and I'll tell you this, there is not one day that passes by that I don't think about the countless students that will be impacted by this, and the parents who have care about their students' education. And so I think about those students every day and the possible negative impact, and especially, how many are we going to lose and because of these changes? And so I think it's up to us as educators, concerned community members, family members, administrators, that we take it upon us to make sure that we don't lose even one.
So, do you think state legislators will ever find a permanent solution to preserve the lottery scholarship?
I think one thing that needs to be really looked at as far as numbers and potential solvency is moving towards a more needs-based model, or maybe at least a compromise of sorts. And to date, it doesn't seem like that's being really put at the table or taken seriously. And so that's one thing that we've been dialoguing about is why not? Why isn't that we look at these numbers that actually show that many of the students who benefit from the lottery scholarship are not the ones that you would, basically consider that need it the most. And so a lot of the students who actually benefit from the lottery scholarship, their parents actually make incomes well over $90,000. Sometimes some of the figures have been over $150,000. And so when we look at that data, it just seems, contradictory to what the lottery scholarship actually should symbolize. And so I think that having serious discussions about moving towards a needs-based model would be great. And one of the things that we've discussed is maybe not excluding higher income students completely, but maybe let's have a cap of sorts, right? Maybe let's cap them at close to $1,000 or $1,000, and that way they receive some of the funding. And then let's look at the numbers there. What would be the potential savings and solvency if we actually had some types of caps at the higher end incomes? And so that's something that definitely needs to be addressed, and we hope that it is addressed at this coming session or in, the near future.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.